If you've ever had everything you believed ripped out from under you in a single moment and somehow found the strength to keep going, this story might meet you right where it hurts. Subscribe for more personal stories of heartbreak, revelation, and hard-won peace. And comment below. What would you do if you discovered the child you raised wasn't your own? My name is Daniel, and I turned 50 last spring. 3 months ago, I almost died. A sudden blood infection, high fever, confusion. I collapsed in the garage after dinner. When I came to, I was in a hospital bed with a nurse adjusting my and a doctor saying, "We need to start a transfusion soon." They had already tested my blood. I'm O-negative universal donor, but very sensitive to matches. My wife, Lisa, had told them our son could donate. Ben, 18, healthy. But the doctor shook his head. We ran the cross-match. He's AB positive, completely incompatible. I blinked. Are you sure? Triple-checked. Very rare for a father and son to be that opposite. But genetics can surprise us sometimes. Only, I wasn't surprised. I was sick to my stomach. Ben always believed he was AB. We'd done a school project once. I was the one who helped him build the genetic trait chart. It had seemed off back then, but we laughed it off. I figured Lisa had the rare gene mix. I didn't ask more. But now, the math didn't add up. It couldn't. I made it through the worst of the infection. But I left that hospital with more than antibiotics. I left with a question I couldn't unask. I waited 2 weeks until I could walk, drive, move without pain. And then, one morning, I drove to a private clinic across town and asked for a paternity test. Just me and Ben. I told him it was for insurance paperwork. A formality. He shrugged, smiled, said sure. 5 days later, the results came back. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. I didn't breathe for nearly a minute. It was like the floor tilted beneath me. 18 years of diapers and night feedings and scraped knees. And Dad, can I sleep in your bed? 18 years of baseball practices, science fair posters, Christmas mornings. 18 years of calling him my boy. And now, a piece of paper was telling me I never was. I didn't tell Lisa right away. I sat with it. I walked miles around the neighborhood at night, hands in my pockets, praying the anger would subside. It didn't, but something deeper formed beneath it, a grief I didn't know how to name. One evening, I asked her softly, calmly, when Ben had been conceived. She froze. Why? I need to know. She sat down at the kitchen table, didn't look at me, and said, "It was a few weeks before I met you. I found out I was pregnant 2 months into us dating. I panicked, but you were kind. You were steady. I didn't want to lose that." I stood there, silent. She finally looked up. I told myself it didn't matter. She cried, begged for forgiveness, told me I was the only father Ben had ever known, that she always intended to tell me but it was never the right time, that I was more of a father than he would have ever been. I walked out the door, sat in my truck for over an hour, and for the first time since the hospital, I thought about not coming back. But then I remembered Ben, who still texted me, "You want coffee?" when he got off work early. Ben, who called me Dad even when he was angry. Ben, who brought me soup during recovery and stayed up to make sure I was breathing okay through the night. He didn't lie to me. He didn't know he was still my son that night. I stared at the family photos on the wall. I saw what was real, not DNA, not blood. Love, the kind you give without knowing if you get it back. But love can't fix betrayal, so I made a decision. There was no shouting, no plates broken, number dramatic exit. Just a man in his 50s folding laundry in silence while the woman he once loved sat across the room. Wringing her hands like that could somehow undo 18 years of deception. Lisa didn't speak first. I did. And what I said surprised even me. I'm not angry anymore. Not in the way you probably expect. I'm tired, that's the word. She looked up. I know, she whispered. I know you are. I shook my head. You don't. Because if you did, you'd understand this isn't just about the lie. It's about the years I gave without knowing what was real. It's about every time I showed up. Every time I put aside my own doubts because I thought love was the only thing that mattered. Tears welled up in her eyes. I kept going, and the worst part is, it did matter, but you still didn't tell me. That night, we sat on opposite ends of the living room couch. Ben was out with friends. The house felt like a museum, familiar, but not ours anymore. Lisa handed me a folder. Inside were the divorce papers. I hadn't asked her to prepare them, but she knew, she always did know when something was ending. She just never said it aloud. I didn't love him, she said suddenly. Ben's biological father. It was messy. It was stupid. I didn't even want to keep the baby at first. But then you came along, and I saw a life I didn't think I deserved. Her voice cracked, and I held on to it with both hands, even if it meant lying to keep it. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been shredded in the quiet. When Ben came home, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the papers still in front of me. He dropped his backpack by the door and said, "Hey, Dad." I nodded. "Got a minute?" "Yeah, sure," he said, confused. He sat across from me. I looked at him, really looked. 18 years old, tall, strong chin, eyes like Lisa's. The same nervous tick I used to have when I was that age, bouncing one knee under the table. He didn't know. He didn't deserve to know this way, but I couldn't lie to him. "Not now, Ben," I said. "There's something you should hear from me, and only me." I told him everything, slowly, carefully, without bitterness. His face went white. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "So, are you still my dad?" My voice broke. "Ben, that's not even a question." He nodded, then stood up, walked around the table, and hugged me so tightly I thought something in me would finally split. But instead, something inside began to heal. Later that week, I moved into a small rental on the other side of town, not far, but far enough to breathe. Ben helped me carry the boxes. Lisa didn't come. There were no angry texts, no guilt trips, no desperate calls in the middle of the night. We signed the papers. It was done. 18 years of marriage reduced to 2 signatures and a quiet hallway. But I didn't feel empty. I felt clean, like stepping out of a storm and realizing you'd been soaked for years without noticing. Ben visited often. He'd show up after class with Chinese takeout, plop on the couch like he'd always belonged there. One evening, he brought me a small frame with a photo of us fishing. He was 9. I had sunburn on my neck and my arm around his shoulder. There was a sticky note attached. It said, "This is what counts." I cried for the first time in months. Not out of pain, out of relief, because no matter what Lisa broke, Ben never did. The thing no one tells you about starting over at 50 is how quiet it feels. Not lonely quiet. There are no congratulatory toasts for choosing peace. No celebrations when you walk away from a broken marriage with your dignity instead of your fists. Just long mornings, soft lights, and the hum of a refrigerator you now call your own. I'd wake up in my new place, a modest 2-bedroom on the edge of town, with paint-chipped cabinets and creaky floors, but I could breathe. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I didn't decorate much. A few framed photos, a stack of books I kept rereading, Ben's fishing rod, leaning in the corner of the living room like a flag I'd chosen to plant in a future that wasn't stolen, it was reclaimed. He came by almost every weekend. No court orders, no scheduling. He just came. We'd eat cheap burgers, watch old movies, argue over which baseball team had the better farm system. It was natural. It was ours. And that's when I realized something that shook me. He didn't stay out of obligation. He stayed because he still saw me as dad, even when the DNA said otherwise, even when the foundation cracked, even when I questioned everything I'd ever given him. He stayed. One Saturday afternoon, he showed up with a box. "Cleaning out my closet," he said. "Found some old stuff." Inside, a Father's Day card from 2nd grade, a tiny clay handprint from preschool, a letter he wrote at 12. "Things I love about my dad." Number 4 said, "He never yells. He just listens really hard." I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the letter. He sat next to me. "Still true," he said. And that's when it clicked. I may not have created him, but I raised him, and in every way that mattered. He was mine that week. I went back to therapy, not because I was broken, because I wanted to make sure I stayed whole. We talked about grief, not the kind that comes with funerals, the quieter kind, the kind that shows up in grocery store aisles and when you're folding the laundry and realize you no longer have to buy the kind of yogurt your ex liked. The therapist asked me, "What do you miss most?" I thought for a while, then said, "I think I miss believing I was enough." She nodded, then said something that stuck with me. "Maybe now you can start believing it without needing anyone to say it back." I started writing again, journaling, letters to my past self, pages I'd never show anyone except maybe Ben someday, when he's older and wondering what kind of man he should become. I wrote about what it means to love without condition, to give without scoreboard, to forgive without forgetting, and how, even in betrayal, there is something holy about choosing not to harden. One afternoon, Ben called me from his dorm. He was halfway through his first semester at college. "Dad," he said, "there's this psychology professor who says childhood is just a long trust fall." That hit me hard. "Why?" I asked. "Because," I realized, "I never fell." "What do you mean?" "I never had to wonder if you'd be there to catch me." I couldn't speak, so he kept going. "I know things are complicated now, but you were my net dad." I closed my eyes, not to escape, but to memorize the sound of that. Some men leave legacies in bank accounts or buildings. I was leaving mine in moments, in every hug I didn't pull away from, in every question I let him ask twice, in every time I said, "I'm proud of you." Even when he hadn't achieved anything, he was just himself. That winter, he brought a girl home for the first time. They were awkward, polite, She helped me set the table and said, "Ben talks about you all the time." I smiled. "I hope he says the good stuff." "He does," she said. "He says you're the reason he believes in steady things." That night, after they left, I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee going cold in my hands and a quiet ache in my chest. Not sadness, something else, peace. Maybe the kind that tells you you didn't waste your love, even if it was misled, even if it was taken, even if it was never acknowledged by the person who should have stood beside you. You gave it anyway, and someone caught it. Asterisk. It happened on a Sunday I hadn't planned for. I was at the local farmer's market, picking up apples. The kind Ben liked, baked into pies, something I'd been trying to learn since he left for college. I'd just handed cash to the vendor when I heard a voice behind me. "Daniel," I turned. It had been nearly a year since I'd last seen Lisa. She looked older, not tired, just real. Her hair was tied back, no makeup, a different kind of weight on her shoulders. For a second, we just stared, not like strangers, but like two people with too much history between them to pretend they didn't recognize each other. "Hey," she said, her voice small. "Hey," I answered. She gestured toward the bench under a maple tree just off the market path. "Can we sit?" I didn't move at first, then nodded, and we sat 2 feet apart, paper bag of apples on my lap, her eyes on the pavement. She didn't start with excuses. "No, I've been thinking," or "You look good," just this, "I'm sorry." I looked at her, waited, double quotes, "Not just for what I did, but for what I let you believe, for what I used you to feel, for hiding behind your kindness because I couldn't stand in my own truth." She breathed in, slow and shaky. "You were always good. I just never thought I deserved it. So I pretended you didn't need the truth." I said nothing, not because I didn't have words, but because hers were finally enough. She reached into her coat and pulled out a photo, a copy of one we'd taken when Ben was 10. Us at the beach. Sand stuck to his elbows, my arm around both of them. "He keeps this framed in his dorm," she said. "Told me once it reminds him of what real love looks like." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "He meant you." I swallowed hard. "Why are you telling me this now?" She looked down, because I kept waiting to stop feeling guilty. But I realized the only way to make peace with the past is to name it out loud to the person I hurt most. I nodded, let the wind say what I couldn't yet. Then I finally spoke. "I'm not angry anymore, Lisa. I haven't been for a while." She looked surprised. "I spent years carrying the pain like it was proof that I was wronged, proof that I mattered. But it was just weight, and I got tired of dragging it around." She wiped her eyes. "So you forgive me?" I paused. "Forgave you the day Ben hugged me after I told him the truth and said I was still his dad. That hug, it wiped everything else away." She broke then, not loudly, just quietly, like someone who'd been holding her breath for too long. "We didn't hug. We didn't exchange numbers. We just sat there for a while longer, watching people pass by with their paper bags and pumpkin bread, none of them knowing what that bench held." Then she stood up. "Thank you," she whispered, and walked away. That night, I baked the pie. It burned a little on one side, but it didn't matter because, as I pulled it from the oven, I realized something. The apology didn't change the past, but it allowed the future to be free of it. Ben called the next morning. We talked for an hour about school, a girl he liked, the pressure of midterms. I saw Mom, I said eventually. He didn't say much, just waited. She apologized. A pause. Good, he said. You deserved that. Then, so do I. We didn't talk about the details. We didn't need to, because forgiveness had already happened, not in words, but in the spaces between them, in every visit, every text, every unspoken thank you between father and son. It was late after midnight, the kind of night where the house is still and nothing hums, not the fridge, not the pipes, not even the wind outside. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of tea gone cold, staring at a blank page in a notebook I hadn't touched in years. It used to be for grocery lists, chores, things that felt urgent at the time. But now it felt like the only place I could say something final, not for anyone else. For me, I picked up the pen and started writing, not to Lisa, not to Ben, to the man I was once. Dear Daniel, you were doing the best you could when you rushed into a marriage because it felt like the right thing, when you stayed quiet to keep the peace, when you carried the weight of a lie you didn't know you were holding. You loved with your whole heart, even when the foundation was cracked, and when the truth came, when it shattered everything. You didn't shatter with it. You chose grace. You chose to stay present for a boy who still looked at you and said, Dad, with his whole chest. You walked away with your name intact. You forgave, not because they earned it, but because you deserved the space it gave you. You started over, not bitter, not broken, just awake. And now, look at you, quiet, steady, at peace. No one claps for that kind of healing, but it's the kind that lasts. So, this isn't a goodbye. It's a thank you for hanging on when everything in you wanted to let go, for choosing love anyway, for choosing yourself. Finally, with respect, Daniel. I closed the notebook, not to hide the words, to honor them. They didn't need to be shared. They just needed to exist. The next morning, I mailed a letter to Ben, not a dramatic one, just a card. Inside I wrote, proud of you, always, no matter what. He called me 3 days later. Thanks for the card, Dad. I smiled. You're welcome, you know, he said. I tell people you're not my biological father. Yeah, I said carefully. Yeah, I tell them you're better than that. Later that night, I stood by the window and watched the streetlights flicker on, one by one, a long row of quiet lights leading into the dark. That's how life felt now. Not flashy, not clean, just a series of steady steps forward. Some days still, a little heavy, but no longer carrying anything that didn't belong to me. I didn't get closure from Lisa, not really, but I stopped needing it, because the only person I ever truly needed to hear "I forgive you" from was me. And I finally did. So, if you're reading this or listening to this, and you've been blindsided by the people you trusted most, if you've had to build your life again from the ground up, not because of failure, but because of someone else's silence, I hope you know you're allowed to let go. You're allowed to heal without a scene. You're allowed to say, this was not okay, and still choose peace over punishment. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop proving yourself to people were never looking in the first place, and start becoming the version of yourself doesn't need to be explained. This is who I became, not because of the pain, but because I refused to let it define me.